The lunch rush had finally ended, and Amelia Chen's feet ached as she wiped down the last table in her section. 6 hours into her double shift at Bellini's, an upscale Italian restaurant tucked between designer boutiques in the Arts District, and she still had another 6 to go. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and straightened her black uniform, catching her reflection in the polished window. Sometimes she barely recognized herself anymore. "Order up, table 7, called Rico from the kitchen. Amelia sighed, put on her customer service smile, and hurried to collect the plates. As she carefully arranged them on her serving tray, she could hear the faint sounds of classical music drifting from the restaurant speakers, Debussy's Clair de Lune. Her fingers instinctively twitched, muscle memory from years of playing the piece, and for a brief moment, she was transported elsewhere, Earth to Amelia. Rico snapped his fingers. "Food's getting cold, daydreamer." "Sorry," she mumbled, lifting the heavy tray with practiced ease. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Amelia had touched a piano. 3 years since the day everything had fallen apart. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. Other times the memory was so fresh it made her chest tighten. The baby grand piano sat in the corner of the restaurant's main dining room, more decoration than instrument. Polished black and gleaming under soft lighting, it was purely for show, part of the restaurant's attempt to appear cultured and sophisticated. Amelia walked past it several times a day, each time averting her eyes as if looking directly at it might conjure unwanted ghosts. "You doing okay today?" asked Danny, another waitress who'd started around the same time as Amelia. Short with bright copper hair and a scatter of freckles, Danny was one of the few people at Bellini's that Amelia would consider a friend, though even she didn't know about Amelia's past. "Just tired," Amelia replied, stacking empty plates from a recently vacated table, trying to figure out how to pay my electricity bill and have enough left for textbooks next semester. "College is such a racket," Danny said, shaking her head. "What are you studying again?" "Business?" "Accounting," Amelia corrected, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Practical, reliable, steady paychecks." "Sounds thrilling," Danny teased. What Amelia didn't say was that she wasn't enrolled yet, that the community college application sat half-completed on her tiny apartment desk, that every time she tried to fill it out, something inside her rebelled at the thought of spending her life with spreadsheets and tax forms. But what choice did she have? The truth was, Amelia had once been destined for a very different future. By age 6, she was playing Beethoven. By 12, she was performing Mozart concertos with the Youth Symphony. And by 18, she'd been accepted to one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country, with professors whispering that she had that rare combination of technical brilliance and emotional depth that couldn't be taught. Then came the day of the Schumann competition, her chance to secure a full scholarship and perform with the National Symphony. She'd prepared for months, pushing herself through endless practice sessions, determined to be flawless. Her parents had flown in, sacrificing nearly a month's rent for the plane tickets. The judges included 3 renowned pianists she'd grown up idolizing. And then, sitting at the gleaming concert grand with hundreds of eyes on her, something broke. Her hands froze, then trembled. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 stumbled from her fingers like drunken footsteps. Sweat beaded her forehead as panic rose within her, stealing her breath, blurring her vision. She'd tried to continue, but the notes on the page swam before her eyes, her fingers betraying her at every turn. She didn't remember leaving the stage, just the crushing silence afterward, the looks of pity and disappointment, the scholarship evaporating along with her dreams. After that, Amelia couldn't bring herself to touch a piano again. The mere thought of playing triggered such intense anxiety that she'd become physically ill. She'd withdrawn from the conservatory, packed up her life, and moved 3 states away, determined to start fresh where nobody knew her as that promising pianist who cracked under pressure. "You've got a new table," called Vince, the floor manager, interrupting her thoughts. "Table 12, Amelia glanced at her watch. It was only 3:30, that awkward time between lunch and dinner when the restaurant was mostly empty, except for tourists who didn't know any better, and business people having late meetings. Table 12 was in the corner by the windows, a middle-aged couple celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary. Amelia took their order, the woman indecisive, the man impatient, and headed to the kitchen, where she found Danny filling salt shakers. 2 more months, Amelia said quietly, leaning against the counter. 2 more months and I'll have enough saved for the first semester's tuition. And then what? You'll still need this job to pay rent, Danny pointed out. Part-time, maybe. I can handle classes during the day and dinner shifts. When will you sleep? Amelia shrugged. Sleep is overrated. Truth was, sleep had been her enemy since the competition disaster. Too many nights spent staring at the ceiling. Phantom piano music playing in her head. Her fingers twitching with passages she'd once mastered. Sometimes she'd dream she was playing perfectly, only to wake with tears on her face, the loss fresh all over again. The kitchen doors swung open as Vince entered, looking stressed. Heads up, everyone. We just got word that Lawrence Phelps is coming in for dinner tonight. A collective groan rose from the staff. Lawrence Phelps was a food critic known for scathing reviews and impossible standards. His column in the city paper could make or break a restaurant. He's bringing a party of 8, including Victor Harmon, Vince continued. This name meant nothing to the others, but Amelia felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Victor Harmon, the legendary conductor of the Philharmonic, whose master classes she'd once desperately tried to attend. Victor Harmon, known for his genius as much as his volatile temperament and exacting standards. Who's that? Asked Rico, wiping his hands on his apron. Some big-shot classical music conductor, Vince explained. Apparently he's in town for a special performance this weekend. Phelps and Harmon are old friends or something. Great, muttered the head chef. A food critic and a temperamental artist. Just what we need on a Friday night. Amelia, you'll take their table, Vince decided. What? No, I can't. Amelia started, panic rising in her throat. You're the most experienced server on tonight and you don't get flustered easily, Vince said, misinterpreting her reaction as modesty. Plus, your section has the large round table they requested. Amelia wanted to protest further, but knew it would only raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. How could she explain that waiting on Victor Harmon would be like having her past life collide violently with her present one? That the man had once been her hero, someone whose career she'd studied and admired? Fine, she managed, her voice tight. For the next few hours, Amelia moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She polished glasses until they sparkled, meticulously reset tables with fresh linens, and checked the wine list 3 times to make sure she knew every vintage. All the while, a knot of dread tightened in her stomach. When she returned to her tiny apartment between shifts to change into a fresh uniform, Amelia found herself standing before the small box she kept, pushed to the back of her closet. Inside were the remnants of her former life. Competition programs, old sheet music, a few photographs of her at the piano, looking confident and alive in a way she no longer recognized. At the bottom lay a CD, a recording of Victor Harmon conducting Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece that had first made her fall in love with classical music as a child. She'd listened to it countless times, dreaming of one day performing it with an orchestra under his direction. It doesn't matter, she told herself firmly, closing the box without opening it. He won't recognize you. You're just a waitress now. Still, as she headed back to Bellini's for her evening shift, Amelia felt like she was walking toward an execution. The restaurant had transformed for dinner service. Lights dimmed, candles lit. The background music switched to soft jazz. The piano in the corner seemed to watch her accusingly as she passed. They're here, hissed Danny as Amelia tied her apron. The critic and his party just pulled up in 2 black cars. Amelia took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and straightened her shoulders. She could do this. She would serve them professionally, stay invisible as much as possible, and get through the night without incident. Victor Harmon would never connect the confident server before him with the trembling, failed pianist from 3 years ago. As the group was seated at her largest table, Amelia hung back, allowing Vince to welcome them with excessive enthusiasm. From a distance, she studied Victor Harmon, older than in her memories, his hair now more silver than black, but still carrying himself with the same commanding presence that could silence an entire orchestra with a single gesture. You've got this, she whispered to herself, clutching her order pad like a shield. It's just another table. Just another shift. Just another day of your new life. But as she approached to take their drink orders, the opening notes of Debussy drifted once more from the speakers, and Amelia's traitorous fingers twitched at her side, a pianist's hands remembering what the mind had tried so hard to forget. Amelia approached the table with her professional smile firmly in place, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. 8 pairs of eyes turned to her, but she focused only on taking their drink orders, scribbling quickly in her notepad. "And may I recommend some appetizers to start?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Lawrence Phelps, the food critic, peered at her over half-moon glasses. "The chef's choice. Whatever he's most proud of." Amelia nodded, making another note. When she looked up, she found Victor Harmon studying her with unsettling intensity. "Have we met before?" he asked suddenly. The pen froze in Amelia's hand. "I don't think so, sir." "You look familiar." "I have one of those faces," she said with a practiced laugh, then quickly moved on. "Our specials tonight include a wild mushroom risotto with black truffle and—" "Young lady," Victor interrupted. "What is that dreadful music playing?" Amelia listened. The restaurant's background music had switched to a smooth jazz version of a classical piece, the kind of watered-down arrangement that serious musicians despised. "Believe it's a jazz interpretation of Mozart's Symphony No. 40, she answered, immediately regretting her specific knowledge. Victor's eyebrows shot up. "You know Mozart." "Everyone knows Mozart," she deflected, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I'll get those drinks started right away." She escaped to the bar, her hand slightly trembling as she relayed the order to Pete, the bartender. "You okay?" Pete asked, reaching for a bottle of top-shelf scotch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Amelia muttered. When she returned with the drinks, the conversation at the table had turned to the weekend's upcoming concert, where Victor would be conducting the Philharmonic in a program of Russian composers. "The soloist for the Rachmaninoff is quite promising," Victor was saying, as Amelia carefully placed his scotch before him. "Though these young pianists today lack the emotional depth of previous generations. Too much technique, not enough heart." Amelia's jaw tightened as she arranged the remaining drinks. "Not everyone can be Horowitz," laughed one of the women at the table. "True artistry is rare," Victor agreed, taking a sip of his scotch. "That's why—" He paused abruptly, his face contorting into a grimace. "What is this?" Amelia froze. "Single malt scotch, aged 18 years. Is something wrong with it?" "Not the drink," Victor said irritably, waving his hand. This abomination they're playing now." The speakers were now playing an electronic dance remix of Beethoven's Für Elise, with a heavy beat and synthesized orchestration. "I can't possibly enjoy a meal with this." "Assault on my ears," Victor declared, looking around the restaurant with growing disdain. His gaze stopped at the baby grand piano in the corner. "Is that an actual piano or merely a prop?" Lawrence Phelps chuckled. "Now, Victor, not every restaurant can afford a concert pianist for dinner music, but they can afford that piano," Victor pointed out. He turned to Amelia. "Does it work?" "I believe so," she answered cautiously. "It's tuned regularly, but it's mainly for decoration." "Decoration?" Victor scoffed as if she'd said something deeply offensive. "A piano is not furniture. It's a voice, an instrument of expression." He drained his scotch and held out the glass for a refill. "Where's your manager?" Amelia's stomach dropped. "I'll get him for you." She hurried to find Vince, who was checking on the kitchen's preparations for the VIP table. "Mr. Harmon wants to speak with you," she said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "He's unhappy with the music." Vince's face fell. "What's wrong with the music?" "Everything, apparently." "Great," Vince muttered. "Just what we need." He straightened his tie and followed Amelia back to the table. Victor Harmon wasted no time. "This music is unacceptable. It's a desecration of masterpieces." "I'm very sorry, sir," Vince said smoothly. "We can certainly change the playlist." No, Victor interrupted. "The problem isn't just the selection. It's the quality. These electronic reproductions lack soul." He gestured to the piano. "You have a perfectly good instrument sitting there gathering dust. Why not use it?" Vince blinked. "Well, we don't actually have a pianist on staff." "Then find someone," Victor said, as if it were the simplest solution in the world. "Surely someone here can play." The table had gone quiet, everyone watching the exchange with varying degrees of discomfort and amusement. Lawrence Phelps was observing with undisguised interest, clearly making mental notes for his review. Vince looked around desperately. "I don't think any of our staff are trained pianists, Mr. Harmon." "Nonsense," Victor said. "Someone must know how to play. Even rudimentary skills would be better than this electronic drivel. Amelia kept her eyes down, focusing intently on refilling water glasses, praying she'd become invisible. Well, Vince said hesitantly, I could ask around. As Vince disappeared to interrogate the staff, Amelia continued serving the table, taking their dinner orders while steadfastly avoiding Victor's gaze. She was just about to escape to the kitchen when Danny appeared beside her. Vince wants to see you, she whispered. Like right now. Amelia followed Danny to the small office behind the kitchen where Vince was pacing. Please tell me you play piano, he said without preamble. Amelia's mouth went dry. What piano do you play? Even a little? Vince looked desperate. Nobody else on staff does. Pete took lessons as a kid but says he can barely remember chopsticks. I don't play, Amelia said, the lie bitter on her tongue. Are you sure? Because I swear I once saw you looking at that piano like, I don't know, like you knew something about it. Lots of people look at pianos, Amelia said defensively. It doesn't mean they can play. Vince ran a hand through his hair. Harmon's making this a thing. Phelps is eating it up. If we don't find someone to play even a few simple tunes, I'm afraid Phelps will destroy us in his review. That's not fair, Amelia protested. The food here is excellent. The service is good. What does it matter if there's no live piano music? It matters because Harmon is making it matter and Phelps clearly agrees with him, Vince said. Look, if you know anyone, a friend, a relative, who could come in quickly and just play a few pieces, I'll pay them double our hourly rate. Amelia thought of her old classmates from the conservatory, some of whom lived in the city. But she'd cut all ties with that world. She wouldn't even know how to reach them now. I'm sorry, she said. I can't help. When she returned to the dining room, the tension at Victor's table was palpable. The conductor was expounding loudly on the decline of musical appreciation in modern society, while Lawrence Phelps nodded sagely, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. It's symptomatic of our culture's larger problems, Victor was saying as Amelia brought their appetizers. We've sacrificed quality for convenience, excellence for accessibility. Not everyone has your trained ear. Victor, one of the women at the table said gently. That's precisely the problem, he replied. We no longer teach people to listen, to truly hear. As Amelia set down a plate of calamari, Victor turned to her abruptly. What do you think, young lady? Do you believe musical education is important? Put on the spot, Amelia fumbled for a safe answer. I suppose all education is valuable. A diplomatic response, Victor said, clearly unimpressed. But surely you must have an opinion on the arts. I think everyone connects with music in their own way, Amelia said carefully. Some people prefer classical, others jazz or rock or hip-hop. It's all valid. Victor looked as if she'd suggested the earth was flat. That kind of relativism is exactly what's destroying standards of excellence. Not all music is created equal. Amelia should have nodded politely and moved on. Instead, something inside her bristled at his dismissiveness. With respect, sir, I think music's value often lies in how it makes people feel, not in its technical complexity. A hush fell over the table. Victor Harmon stared at her, his expression unreadable. An interesting perspective, he said finally. And how does music make you feel? The question hung in the air between them, fraught with meanings Amelia couldn't possibly explain to this table of strangers. How could she describe what music had once meant to her? How it had been her voice, her joy, her future, and then her greatest humiliation? It depends on the music, she said quietly. Just then, Vince reappeared, looking defeated. I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Harmon, but we don't have anyone available who can play the piano tonight. Victor sighed dramatically. A pity. I suppose we'll have to endure this musical assault through dinner then. Vince hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. We do have a sound system where we can play different music. If you'd prefer something specific, perhaps recordings of classical pieces without the modern arrangements? That would be marginally better, Victor conceded. Excellent. Amelia can help you select something appropriate, Vince said, then added casually. She seems to know her classical music. Victor's attention snapped back to her with renewed interest. Does she now? Amelia shot Vince a look of betrayal, but he was already heading back to the kitchen. Well then, Victor said, studying her with those penetrating eyes. It seems you've been hiding something from us, Amelia. I just recognize a few famous pieces, she said weakly. Most people do. Mozart's Symphony No. 40 in G minor isn't exactly Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Victor countered. Come now, where did you learn about classical music? My parents played it sometimes, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. If you'll excuse me, I should check on your entrees. Throughout the main course, Amelia managed to keep conversation to a minimum, but she could feel Victor watching her. It was as if he were trying to solve a puzzle, and she was terrified he'd eventually put the pieces together. As she cleared the dinner plates, disaster struck. Lawrence Phelps, who had been silent for much of the meal, suddenly snapped his fingers. I've got it, he said, turning to Victor. Chen, the name on her tag. Wasn't there a young pianist named Chen who— I need to get dessert menus, Amelia interrupted quickly. Would anyone care for coffee? But it was too late. She could see the realization dawning on Victor's face, his eyes widening with recognition. Of course, he said softly. The Schumann competition, 3 years ago. And in that moment, Amelia knew her carefully constructed new life was about to collapse around her. The silence that followed Victor's words seemed to stretch for an eternity. Amelia stood frozen, dessert menus clutched to her chest like a shield, as every eye at the table turned toward her. Amelia Chen, Victor said thoughtfully, tapping his finger against his wineglass. You were the girl with the Chopin ballad. Heat rushed to Amelia's face. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as a case of mistaken identity, but her tongue felt glued to the roof of her mouth. I never forget a performer, Victor continued. You had remarkable technique. Extraordinary potential. Lawrence Phelps leaned forward, his food critic's instinct for a story clearly piqued. Am I missing something here? Miss Chen was a piano prodigy, Victor explained, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face. One of the most promising young talents I'd seen in years. She was a finalist in the Schumann competition. Quite prestigious, but then— He trailed off, apparently realizing the delicacy of the situation. But then I choked. Amelia finished for him, finding her voice at last. It came out stronger than she expected. Stage fright. I forgot the piece halfway through. Disaster. End of story. She forced a smile. Now about those desserts, you work here? As a waitress? Victor asked incredulously. Yes, she replied, lifting her chin slightly. I do. And I need to attend to my job, so if you'll excuse me— Wait. Victor held up his hand. This is perfect, actually. You can play for us. Amelia's stomach plummeted. No, I don't play anymore. Nonsense. One doesn't simply forget years of training. I haven't touched a piano in 3 years, she said, her voice hardening. I'm not performing for your dinner entertainment. A hush fell over the table. Even Victor looked taken aback by her directness. Lawrence Phelps's eyebrows shot up as he scribbled something in his notebook. I apologize if I've offended you, Victor said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. I was merely suggesting a solution that would benefit everyone. Your restaurant needs a pianist, and you are clearly qualified. Amelia, came Vince's voice from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing excitement. Is this true? You're a pianist? Was, she corrected firmly. I was a pianist. Vince looked from her to Victor Harmon and back again, clearly putting the pieces together. Why didn't you say something when I asked? Because it's not relevant to my job here, Amelia said, desperation creeping into her voice. Vince, please. I don't play anymore. I can't. But she could see the wheels turning in her manager's head. A professionally trained pianist on staff. What a boon that would be for the restaurant. What a story. What a gimmick. Mr. Harmon, Vince said, turning to the conductor with a deferential smile. Perhaps we could persuade Amelia to play just one piece. For a special guest like yourself. Vince! Amelia protested, but he silenced her with a look that clearly said, This could save our review. I wouldn't want to force anyone, Victor said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But I do believe it would be a shame to let such talent go to waste. He turned to Amelia. Sometimes the only way past fear is through it. Easy for you to say, she muttered. Lawrence Phelps closed his notebook with a decisive snap. Well, this has certainly been an unexpected twist to our evening. I must say I'm intrigued. A hidden virtuoso in our midst. He gave Amelia a considering look. I've always believed that true passion never dies. It merely hibernates. Please, Vince whispered to Amelia. Just one song, Anything. It could make all the difference for us. Amelia looked around the table at the expectant faces, then at Vince's pleading expression. She thought of her fellow staff members whose livelihoods depended on the restaurant's success. A bad review from Lawrence Phelps could mean reduced hours, even layoffs. One piece, she said finally, her voice barely audible. A short one. The relief on Vince's face was palpable. "Thank you," he breathed. Victor smiled, looking altogether too pleased with himself. "Excellent. Shall we move to the piano?" The next few minutes passed in a blur. Vince announced to the restaurant that there would be a special performance. Servers quickly rearranged tables to create better sightlines to the piano. Danny appeared at Amelia's side, confused but supportive, offering to take over her tables. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Since when do you play piano?" "Since I was 4, Amelia replied absently, her attention fixed on the gleaming black instrument that now seemed to loom larger than life. As she approached the piano, Amelia's legs felt leaden. Her palms were already damp with sweat. She sat down gingerly on the bench, adjusting it out of habit, her body remembering what her mind wanted to forget. The dining room had gone quiet, all conversations hushed in anticipation. Amelia stared at the keys, ivory and ebony stretching before her like a road she'd once known by heart but had now forgotten how to travel. "Whenever you're ready," Victor said, taking a seat at a nearby table that gave him a clear view of her hands. Amelia placed her fingers on the keys, then immediately lifted them again. They were trembling violently. "I don't know what to play," she said, her voice small. "Something simple to start," Victor suggested. "Perhaps a Bach prelude?" Amelia nodded stiffly. Bach's Prelude in C major, the first piece in the well-tempered clavier. One of the first serious pieces she'd mastered as a child. Simple arpeggios, predictable chord progressions. She could do this. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes came haltingly, her fingers stiff and uncooperative after years of disuse. She hit a wrong note and winced visibly. Someone in the audience coughed. Amelia's heart raced. This was a mistake. She couldn't do this. She should stop now, apologize, and flee. But then something unexpected happened. As her fingers continued to move across the keys, muscle memory began to awaken. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget. The weight of the keys, the spacing between them, the slight pressure needed for different dynamics. The piece was coming back to her note by note. She relaxed slightly, allowing herself to feel the familiar patterns, the gentle rise and fall of the arpeggios. By the time she reached the end of the short prelude, her playing had smoothed out considerably. There was a smattering of polite applause. Amelia exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. That hadn't been so bad. Not her best, certainly, but not the catastrophe she'd feared. "Again," Victor said, "but this time don't just play the notes. Remember what they mean." Irritation flickered through Amelia. Who was he to command her like one of his orchestra members? But as she began the prelude again, she found herself following his instruction almost against her will. Instead of focusing on the mechanics, she allowed herself to think about the music itself. The mathematical precision of Bach, the perfect balance of his harmonies. Her playing transformed. The notes flowed more naturally, with subtle dynamic changes that breathed life into the simple piece. When she finished, the applause was warmer, more enthusiastic. "Better." Victor nodded. "Much better." Amelia felt a strange, conflicting mix of emotions. Pride at the improvement, resentment at needing his approval, and underneath it all a tiny, dangerous spark of remembered joy. "Try something else," Victor suggested. "Something with more emotion. Chopin, perhaps." "A nocturne?" Amelia's hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. "No Chopin." Victor studied her for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. Because of the competition." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then Debussy, perhaps? Clair de Lune?" The piece had been playing earlier in the restaurant. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. She could handle Debussy. The impressionistic style allowed for more personal interpretation, more freedom. As she began to play, the familiar opening chords of Clair de Lune seemed to envelop the room in a gentle, moonlit glow. This piece had always been one of her favorites, its dreamy quality speaking to something deep within her. Without consciously deciding to, Amelia closed her eyes. The restaurant, the audience, even Victor Harmon faded away. There was only the music. the delicate melody floating above shimmering harmonies, like light reflecting off water. Her body swayed slightly as she played, her fingers finding the keys with increasing confidence. The music flowed through her, a language she had once been fluent in and was now remembering, word by word, phrase by phrase. When she reached the piece's climax, building to that glorious cascade of notes that always reminded her of moonlight breaking through clouds, she felt something shift inside her, a door long closed creaking open just a crack. The final, gentle notes of the piece faded into silence. For a moment no one moved or spoke. Amelia opened her eyes, almost surprised to find herself still at Bellini's, surrounded by strangers. Then the applause began, not polite this time, but enthusiastic, genuine. Some diners were even standing. Amelia blinked, disoriented by the response. "Magnificent," said an older woman at a nearby table, her eyes shining. "Simply magnificent." Vince looked ecstatic. Lawrence Phelps was writing furiously in his notebook, and Victor Harmon was watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You see?" he said quietly as she stood from the piano bench. "It's still there." All of it. Amelia didn't respond. Her emotions were too tangled to sort through. Relief that she'd gotten through it, satisfaction at the audience's response, but also fear. Because playing had felt good. Too good. And that terrified her. "Play something else," someone called from across the restaurant. "Yes, another piece," agreed another voice. Amelia looked to Vince, hoping he'd intervene, but he merely shrugged as if to say, "It's up to you." Before she could decide, Victor stood and approached the piano. "If I may make a suggestion," he said, his voice carrying across the now hushed restaurant. "I believe we should hear Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor." Amelia's blood turned to ice. "No," she said immediately. "It would be a shame not to finish what was started 3 years ago," Victor said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I can't," she whispered. "That piece, it's what broke me. Then it's the only piece that can heal you." His eyes held hers. "Face your demon, Ms. Chen. You're asking too much," she said, her voice shaking. "Am I?" He glanced around the restaurant, then back at her. "Look at what you've already accomplished tonight. These people don't see a failure. They see an artist." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. The ballad was far more technically demanding than anything she'd played so far. It required not just skill but emotional investment, the very thing that had overwhelmed her during the competition. "I haven't practiced in years," she protested. "I'll butcher it, perhaps," Victor acknowledged. "But wouldn't an imperfect performance be better than none at all?" Amelia looked out at the expectant faces of the diners, then back at the piano, an instrument that had once been her closest companion and then her greatest fear. "The choice is yours," Victor said, stepping back. "But remember, sometimes the notes we fear most are the ones we most need to play." Amelia stared at the keyboard, her mind racing. The ballade. The piece that had haunted her dreams for 3 years. The notes she could still hear in her head during sleepless nights, taunting her with what might have been. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to watch, standing in a small cluster by the swinging doors. Danny gave her an encouraging thumbs up, though her eyes reflected confusion about this hidden side of her friend. Victor Harmon stood to the side, arms crossed, waiting. His challenge hung in the air between them. Amelia closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. What was she so afraid of, failing? She'd already experienced the worst failure imaginable. Being judged? These people weren't competition judges. They were just diners looking for entertainment with their tiramisu. "Okay," she said quietly, more to herself than to Victor. "Okay." She positioned her hands over the keys, trying to ignore how they trembled. The opening notes of the ballade were deceptively simple, a gentle, questioning phrase that belied the emotional storm to come. Her fingers pressed down, and those first notes floated into the air, tentative and unsure. Already it felt different from the competition. There she'd been stiff with determination, desperate to be perfect. Now she had no expectations, no scholarship on the line, no future hanging in the balance, just music. The piece continued, moving from its pensive beginning into more complex passages. Amelia stumbled over a run, her fingers fumbling after so much time away from practice. She winced but kept going, pushing through the mistake. As the piece built toward its first climactic moment, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling the familiar panic rising, the tightness in her chest, the suffocating fear, Amelia felt something else entirely. A strange sense of liberation. So what if she missed notes? So what if her technique wasn't flawless? She wasn't that frightened 19-year-old anymore, desperately trying to prove herself worthy. She was playing for herself now, not for judges or scholarships or approval. The realization washed over her like cool water. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing deepened. And suddenly the music began to flow more naturally, her fingers finding their way across the keyboard as if guided by some forgotten instinct. The ballade was a storyteller's piece, romantic, dramatic, full of contrasting emotions. As a student, Amelia had analyzed its structure meticulously, practiced its technical challenges relentlessly, but she'd never truly surrendered to its emotional narrative. Now she found herself doing exactly that. Each phrase became a sentence in a story she was telling, not just playing for the first time. The gentle beginning, the building tension, the moments of sweet tenderness contrasted with passionate outbursts. Victor watched intently, his stern expression gradually softening as he observed the transformation happening before him. This wasn't the technically brilliant but emotionally restrained student he remembered from the competition. This was something else entirely, raw, honest, imperfect yet somehow more complete. As Amelia approached the piece's infamous coda, the blindingly fast, technically demanding conclusion that had been her undoing at the competition, a flicker of the old fear threatened to resurface. Her tempo faltered slightly. From the corner of her eye she saw Victor lean forward, his gaze intensifying. But instead of adding to her anxiety, his attention somehow steadied her. She thought of his words. Face your demon. The demon wasn't the piece itself. It was her fear of imperfection, her belief that one failure defined her worth. With a sudden clarity, Amelia dove into the coda. Her fingers flew across the keys, not always hitting every note cleanly, occasionally blurring passages that should have been crystal clear. But the spirit of the music, its fire, its passion, its relentless forward momentum, came through with an intensity that held everyone in the room spellbound. When she struck the final, thunderous chords, Amelia was breathing hard, as if she'd run a race. For a moment she sat perfectly still, hands suspended above the keys, almost unable to believe what had just happened. She'd done it, not perfectly, far from it, but she'd played the piece from beginning to end. She'd faced the music that had once broken her, and this time she had emerged whole. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before the restaurant erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but the genuine, spontaneous kind that comes from being truly moved. Several diners were on their feet. An older man in the corner was wiping his eyes discreetly with his napkin. Amelia looked up, dazed, to find Danny rushing toward her with a face full of astonishment and delight. That was, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything? Danny sputtered, throwing her arms around Amelia. It wasn't exactly something I wanted to talk about, Amelia replied, still feeling slightly disconnected from reality. Vince appeared at her side, beaming. That was extraordinary, he said. Truly extraordinary. I don't think we've ever had a night like this at Bellini's. Lawrence Phelps was making his way toward them, notebook in hand. Young lady, he said, I came here expecting to write about food, but it seems I'll be writing about music instead. Or perhaps both. A feast for the palate and the ears? He smiled warmly. A rare combination indeed. Amelia nodded, not quite knowing what to say. Her emotions were too jumbled to sort through. Relief, pride, a lingering disbelief, and underneath it all, a strange sense of homecoming. As the excitement around her continued, she found herself searching the room for Victor Harmon. He stood a little apart from the crowd, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't exactly approval, more like acknowledgement, recognition of something accomplished, not just for the audience but for herself. Amelia made her way through the congratulatory diners toward him, still feeling slightly unsteady. Happy now? She asked when she reached him, her tone somewhere between accusation and gratitude. The question is, are you? He replied. Amelia considered this. Was she happy? The answer wasn't simple. She felt changed, as if some rigid structure within her had finally cracked open, allowing her to breathe fully for the first time in years. I don't know yet, she answered honestly. Victor nodded, accepting this. It wasn't perfect, he said. No, it wasn't. But it was real, he continued. Authentic. There's a difference between technical perfection and true artistry. Many pianists never learn that. I'm not a pianist anymore, Amelia said automatically. But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. Victor raised an eyebrow. Really, that's not what I just heard. Before she could respond, he reached into his jacket and produced a business card. I'm the artistic director of the New Horizons Music Foundation, he said, holding it out to her. We provide support for exceptional talents who have faced unusual obstacles. Amelia stared at the card but didn't take it. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Victor said sharply. It's investment. Recognition of potential. You have a gift, Ms. Chen. What you choose to do with it is your decision, but it would be a shame to let fear be the deciding factor. It's not that simple, Amelia said. I have a life now, a job. Plans for school. Accounting, wasn't it? Victor asked, somehow knowing this detail. When Amelia's eyes widened in surprise, he smiled slightly. Your friend mentioned it when you were playing. Seems like an unusual choice for someone with your artistic sensitivity. It's practical, Amelia defended. So is breathing, Victor countered. But there's a difference between breathing just enough to survive and breathing deeply enough to live. He placed the card on the piano. Think about it. We offer flexible programs, performance opportunities, teaching positions, even composition mentorships if that interests you. Why? Amelia asked, genuinely puzzled. Why me? I'm clearly not competition material anymore if I ever was. Because what you just played moved people, Victor said simply. Technical skill can be taught. Emotional honesty, the ability to speak directly to the human heart through music, that's much rarer. He glanced around the restaurant at the still buzzing diners. Look at them. You gave them something authentic in a world full of artificial substitutes. That's worth nurturing. A call from Victor's table interrupted them. His party was preparing to leave. He gave Amelia a slight bow. Think about what I've said. The Foundation's fall showcase is in 2 months. No pressure, no competition, just musicians sharing their gifts. You'd be welcome. As he walked away, Amelia picked up his card, turning it over in her fingers. 2 months. 8 weeks of practice after 3 years of silence. The idea was laughable. And yet, she turned back to the piano, resting her fingertips lightly on the keys without pressing down. The connection felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like reuniting with an old friend after a bitter argument, awkward yet somehow right. That was amazing, came Danny's voice as she appeared at Amelia's side. I still can't believe it. My friend, the secret piano genius, Amelia smiled weakly. Hardly a genius, and are you kidding? People were crying, Amelia. Actual tears, Danny nudged her playfully. So what did the scary conductor guy want? He seemed pretty intense. Amelia glanced down at the card in her hand. He offered me an opportunity, I think. What kind of opportunity? A musical one, and... Are you going to take it? Amelia hesitated. Just hours ago, the idea of returning to music would have seemed impossible. A door firmly closed and locked. Now that door stood slightly ajar, letting in a sliver of light. I don't know, she said honestly. Well, for what it's worth, Danny said. I think you should. I've never seen you look so alive, as you did when you were playing. The kitchen doors swung open and Rico emerged, clapping slowly. So, piano girl, he called. Does this mean you're quitting the Waitress gig to become a famous musician? Amelia laughed, surprised by how light she suddenly felt. I doubt fame is in the cards for me, Rico. Why not? He challenged. Stranger things have happened. Indeed they had, Amelia thought. Like a demanding customer forcing a waitress to confront her deepest fear, only to discover that perhaps it wasn't so terrifying after all. The restaurant was returning to normal, conversations resuming, staff getting back to work. But something had shifted, both in the atmosphere and within Amelia herself. A possibility had opened up where before there had been only resignation. She looked down at Victor's card once more, then carefully tucked it into her pocket. Not a commitment, but not a rejection either. Just a possibility to consider, to sit with, to explore. For now, that was enough. Amelia, Vince called from across the room. Table 15 needs their check. With a small smile, she headed back to work, her steps lighter than they had been in years. Whatever happened next, whether she returned to music fully or simply made peace with that part of her past, something had healed tonight. A fracture mended, a wound finally beginning to close, and as she moved through the restaurant, Amelia realized she was quietly humming to herself, a habit she'd lost long ago, now finding its way back to her note by note. 2 months later, Amelia stood backstage at the Riverside Arts Center, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the heavy curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience gathering for the New Horizons Music Foundation's fall showcase. 5 minutes? Ms. Chen, a stagehand informed her quietly before moving on to the next performer. Amelia nodded, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd borrowed from Danny. It wasn't as elegant as what the other musicians were wearing, but it was the best she could manage on her budget. Besides, tonight wasn't about appearances. It was about the music. She flexed her fingers, which were still slightly tender from the intense practice schedule she'd maintained these past 8 weeks. After that night at Bellini's, something fundamental had changed. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely. She doubted it ever would, but it no longer controlled her. The day after her impromptu performance, Lawrence Phelps's review had appeared in the city paper. To everyone's surprise, he'd devoted only a short paragraph to the food at Bellini's, which he'd deemed competent but uninspired, and spent the rest of his column describing the transcendent musical experience provided by a waitress turned pianist, whose performance of Chopin brought hardened restaurant critics to tears. The review had caused quite a stir. Suddenly, Bellini's was booked solid, with patrons requesting tables near the piano and asking if the pianist would be performing that night. Vince, never one to miss a business opportunity, had offered Amelia a deal: 3 nights a week playing piano for the dinner crowd, with slightly higher pay than her waitressing shifts. She'd hesitated initially, but eventually agreed to try it for a month. That first scheduled performance had been terrifying. Without the spontaneity of that initial night, with people actually coming specifically to hear her, the old anxiety had threatened to return. But something was different now. When the fear rose, she acknowledged it, then gently set it aside, a technique Victor had suggested during their occasional coaching sessions. "Don't fight the fear," he'd told her. "That only gives it more power. Instead, recognize it as part of the process, then focus on why you're playing." And why was she playing? Not for approval or acclaim. Not for scholarships or career advancement. She played because, quite simply, she needed to. Because music was a language her soul knew how to speak, even when her mind had tried to forget. Now, as she waited for her turn on stage, Amelia recalled the journey of these past 2 months. She'd continued working at Bellini's, splitting her time between serving tables and playing piano. The half-completed accounting application had been quietly discarded. Instead, she'd applied for a part-time teaching position at a community arts program, offering piano lessons to children who couldn't afford private instruction. To her surprise, Victor had supported this decision wholeheartedly. "Teaching isn't a diversion from artistry," he'd said. "It's an extension of it. Sometimes we learn most about music by helping others discover it." His mentorship had been unexpected. Rather than pushing her toward competitions or pressuring her to follow traditional paths, he'd encouraged her to find her own way back to music. Their weekly sessions focused not on technical perfection but on emotional authenticity, the quality he'd recognized in her playing that night at the restaurant. 5-minute call. "Everyone," came the stage manager's voice, pulling Amelia from her thoughts. From the other side of the curtain, she heard applause as the current performer finished their piece. Amelia peeked through a small gap in the curtain, scanning the audience. In the 3rd row, she spotted Danny and Rico, who had gotten the night off to support her. Beside them sat Vince, who had closed the restaurant early for the occasion, a previously unimaginable gesture that demonstrated how much things had changed. Her parents weren't there. They lived too far away, and she hadn't been ready to tell them about her return to music. That conversation would come later, when she felt more certain about this new path she was forging. A tap on her shoulder made her turn. Victor stood there, dressed in his customary black suit, his expression unusually gentle. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said with a slight smile. "Nervousness means you care. It's energy. The trick is channeling it into your performance rather than letting it block you." Amelia nodded, trying to absorb this perspective. I'm not playing Chopin tonight, she said, a small act of defiance they'd discussed at length. I know, Victor replied, and I respect your choice. The Debussy suits your current sensibility perfectly. She'd chosen Claude Debussy's Reverie, a piece that was technically less demanding than the Chopin ballade but required a delicate touch and sensitive interpretation. It felt right for this moment, dreamlike, introspective, speaking of possibility rather than virtuosic display. Just remember, Victor continued, you're not playing for the audience or for me or for anyone else. You're playing for the music itself. The concept had seemed abstract when he'd first mentioned it, but over the weeks Amelia had begun to understand. Music wasn't just a series of notes to be executed correctly. It was a living entity that existed in the space between composer, performer, and listener, something to be served rather than conquered. The current performer exited the stage to enthusiastic applause, nodding encouragingly to Amelia as they passed. Ms. Chen, you're up, said the stage manager. Amelia took a deep breath. This wasn't the Schumann competition. This wasn't even Bellini's. This was something new, a step on a path she was creating for herself, one note at a time. As she walked onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinded her. She could barely make out the audience, just a sea of indistinct faces in the darkness beyond the spotlight. The grand piano waited center stage, its lid raised, gleaming under the lights like a black mirror. Amelia took her seat, adjusting the bench slightly. The hush that fell over the audience reminded her of that night at Bellini's, the moment of anticipation before she'd begun to play the ballad. But tonight the silence felt different, supportive rather than judgmental, expectant rather than demanding. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes briefly, and began to play. The opening notes of Reverie floated into the concert hall, gentle and questioning. As Amelia continued, she allowed herself to sink into the music, to become less a performer and more a conduit for Debussy's shimmering, impressionistic world. Unlike her performance at Bellini's, this one wasn't fueled by desperation or challenge. There was a calmness to her playing now, a centeredness that came from these weeks of rediscovery. She wasn't fighting the music or herself anymore. She was simply being with it. When the final notes faded into silence, Amelia opened her eyes. For a moment, the audience remained absolutely still, as if reluctant to break the spell. Then the applause began. Warm, genuine, appreciative. As she stood to take her bow, Amelia spotted Victor in the wings, nodding with what might have been approval. She saw Danny and Rico on their feet, cheering perhaps a bit too enthusiastically for the formal setting. She saw faces she didn't recognize, moved by something she had created. But most importantly, she felt something within herself shift into place, a sense of rightness, of belonging, that had been missing for too long. Backstage after the performance, Victor approached her with an uncharacteristic smile. Well done, he said simply. Thank you, Amelia replied, for tonight and for that night at Bellini's. Even though I was furious with you at the time, Victor chuckled. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives arrive disguised as unwelcome intrusions. I still don't know exactly what comes next, Amelia admitted. I'm not planning to enter competitions again or audition for conservatories. Good, Victor said, surprising her. The traditional path isn't for everyone. Some of the most interesting artists forge their own way. Is that what I am now? An artist? The word felt strange on her tongue, both presumptuous and somehow right. You've always been one, Victor replied. You just lost sight of it for a while. Before she could respond, Danny and Rico burst backstage, ignoring the disapproving looks from some of the other performers. That was amazing, Danny exclaimed, wrapping Amelia in a tight hug. Everyone was completely mesmerized. Even I got a little choked up, Rico admitted, and I usually fall asleep during classical music. Victor excused himself discreetly, leaving Amelia with her friends. As they chatted excitedly about the performance, a young girl approached, program in hand. Excuse me, she said shyly. Are you Miss Chen? Amelia nodded, surprised. Yes, I am. I really liked your playing, the girl said, her eyes wide with admiration. I just started piano lessons last year, but my parents say we can't afford them anymore. She looked down at her shoes. When I heard you're teaching at the community center, I wondered if maybe I could take lessons there. Something warm unfurled in Amelia's chest. What's your name? Zoe, the girl replied. Well, Zoe, the classes start next week, Tuesday afternoons and Saturday mornings. I'd be happy to have you there. Zoe's face lit up. Really, thank you. She hesitated, then asked, Do you think I could ever play like you someday? Amelia considered the question carefully. I think you'll play like yourself, she said finally. And that's even better. After Zoe had gone, Danny nudged Amelia. Teacher and performer. Quite a change from 2 months ago. It's still new, Amelia acknowledged. I'm figuring it out as I go. But you're happier, Danny observed. Anyone can see that, it was true. The tension that had lived in Amelia's shoulders for 3 years had eased. The nightmares about the failed competition had faded. In their place was something unexpected, a sense of purpose, of forward motion. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Amelia found herself alone on the stage. The audience and other performers had moved to the reception in the lobby, but she'd slipped back to the concert hall, drawn to the piano one last time. She sat down quietly and placed her fingers on the keys. Not playing, just feeling the connection. 3 years ago, she'd believed that one moment of failure defined her relationship with music forever. Now she understood that it had merely been one difficult note in a much longer composition, her life's composition, still being written day by day. From the back of the hall, soft footsteps approached. Victor appeared holding 2 glasses of champagne. To new beginnings, he said, offering her one. Amelia accepted it with a smile. To the music, she countered. One and the same, Victor replied. As they clinked glasses, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just to Victor for that intrusive challenge at Bellini's, but to herself for finding the courage to respond. The path ahead wasn't clear or certain, but that was okay. Music, like life, wasn't about reaching a perfect final cadence. It was about the journey, the exploration, the continuous unfolding of one note after another. And for the first time in years, Amelia couldn't wait to hear what came next.